Wojtek. Great to have you here, and thanks for taking this challenge. I would like to start just maybe with giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your journey in Elixir so far, and how's it been?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Wojtek Mach. I'm a developer at Dashbit, and I am a member of a few open source projects. So notably Hex, Ecto. I also help with ExDoc. I'm also creator of Req, an HTTP client. I help with Livebook, just the desktop part. Um, and yeah, I've been working with Elixir for about 8 years now.
Cool. And of course, we're speaking because you'll be giving a talk at Alchemy Conf, which we're gonna go a little bit in detail later on. So you mentioned there a bunch of the open source work you do. If I understand correctly, working at Dashbit as well, you worked with a lot of companies and helping them adopt Elixir and running it in production. I was maybe gonna start there on what have the biggest challenges been that you find with teams adopting Elixir or just scaling up Elixir.
Um, that's a good question. Let's see. So I would say that maybe two different things come to mind. First of all, would be teams that are pretty new to Elixir, so pretty new to functional programming in particular. Kind of less so these days. I believe the paradigm got way more popular. But yeah, still kind of learning Elixir idioms and um, and yeah, kind of like approach to writing code. Um, okay, I said two. I would say maybe three. Then I would say would be clients that run Elixir at scale. So helping them running it in production, debugging issues, um, uh, setting up monitoring, those sort of things. And then, like the third part that came into mind later would be people that are getting to work with using LiveView, which it just hit 1.0. It's been very very well used in the community, but to some people the paradigm is still kind of new. So working with them, yeah.
And what are the challenges that you've seen with those people? Maybe I don't know if you want to split with those groups. Is there like any particular challenges? Just interested in like Elixir adoption and everything. Like, what is there anything that prevents people from going or anything like that?
Um, yeah, no. So like in the first thing that I mentioned, like some of the challenges are again kind of less so these days, but people were not using previously functional programming, so that was kind of challenging to kind of start writing code in this different way. Um, in terms of challenging, so I know of like in general there are some challenges with adoption. um, like I would say though that in our particular case people already adopted the technology, so we are quite kind of ahead in the pipeline, so to speak. um, there would be occasionally questions about hiring and those sort of situations. I guess I can say what we tend to say, which is that even if like maybe it is sometimes challenging to finding Elixir developers, hiring outside of core Elixir skills is always a good idea. But there are actually think still a lot of people that maybe don't have work experience with Elixir, but it is something that they are interested in themselves, kind of personally. And I believe these are excellent candidates because yeah, it is. I'm pretty biased, but I would say it is not super challenging language to pick up, and there have been a lot of resources added. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well in seeing in companies hiring people to learn Elixir, and it works pretty well. So, to those organizations, what would be your advice for someone that is just creating a company, maybe, or is deciding what to use for a new project? Why would they use Elixir?
Yeah. So I would say that Elixir is very good at prototyping a solution. It's a dynamic language, although we are getting types, but I think that it is very easy to try a bunch of different ideas. But then, if it succeeds, if it picks up, you usually end up with an architecture that is going to scale. You don't have to kind of throw away the prototype and rewrite it in something else for it to be um, performant, for it to be able to add kind of more people to the team, more code, and things like that. I think it is kind of I believe it is a scalable language in the sense that it scales in terms of performance, but also in terms of teams. Yeah.
Cool. Um, Thanks for that. Moving on to something you mentioned. So you mentioned you contribute, as you said, like a lot of open source, particularly Hex, Ecto, libraries like that, which are pretty essential projects, I think, in the Elixir ecosystem. My question is, first of all, how did you get involved, and what it is like maintaining and improving libraries like this? Is it a lot of work? Is something that you're still passionate about?
Sure. So how I got started, I was uh, yeah. So before kind of yeah before working with Elixir, I was a Ruby developer, probably like a lot of people, and I after the kind of last job, I took some time off, and I was exploring some kind of different ideas, different programming languages. I ended up learning Elixir, and I actually started kind of like really learning it, really using it by picking up an existing open source project with Elixir and trying to contribute to it. I had a web development background, so I was looking for a kind of um, web application written in Elixir, which is open source, which is Hex. So that's probably one of the oldest, still running. Now it's Phoenix application, open source Phoenix application. So that's the uh, web application behind Hex. So I started kind of sending random pull requests to Hex. I was basically learning Elixir and Plug and Ecto as I was kind of fixing little things here and there. And over time, Eric Meadows Jonsson, who's the creator of Hex, invited me to join the team. And by the way, as an aside, I basically learned a lot of those things, kind of talking with Eric over these pull requests and things like that. Yeah. So that's kind of how I got started. Pretty. So yeah. So you mentioned Hex, so Ecto, and then Phoenix and Plug, kind of like the usual things that people end up using. We use all of them at Hex. So yeah, I suppose if anyone is kind of want to see how a production application looks like, it's they can just look at Hex. Almost everything is open source. Yeah.
Maybe. A question I had as well is it hard to manage your time between your regular job and open source work? How do you manage to
Yeah.
be involved in all these projects and still have some time for
Yeah.
yourself?
No. So that is a very good question. What I like to say that like in general, open source is kind of difficult um, when kind of splitting time between open source and then maybe like regular job. Uh, since joining Dashbeat about 6 years ago, I kind of get to play the open source game on easy mode because we at Dashbit we work with clients as you mentioned, but we also, as part of our jobs, we work on the open source library. So I'm not probably the best person to ask about kind of managing these two, because for me it's part of the job description. Yeah. Just start working. Yeah, no, which actually, like, I mean this sincerely, right? Like, if that's the challenge, though, right? Like, um, if if every, or if half, or if a tenth of companies would allow people to work on open source stuff, a day a week, a day a month, or something like that, I believe we would have so much more activity, and so much more kind of work being done, as opposed to nights and weekends, which may or may not be available to a lot of people. Um,
Mm, in that sense, you mentioned so you have time to work on open source, which is great. But what keeps you working on open source, but more specifically in the Elixir ecosystem? What keeps you involved?
sure. So that's a good question. I would say that I I I'm not sure how exactly I ended up kind of like where I am, but I kind of like to build tools that people can then use to build products. So for me, like working with Hex, for example, was like, how do we make it easier for people to build packages and share packages and ensure like security and stuff like that. And honestly, in the case of Hex, it's also like, on one hand, it matches my skill set, which is web development. But on the other hand, it's also kind of like any little small change that I would add or improve to Hex is going to be used by thousands of people, which is pretty insane. I think so. Kind of same idea with ExDoc, for example, right? Like any little improvement to ExDoc, make like removing one step or kind of surfacing more information has huge impact, I believe, because these tools tend to be used by most of the people in the community. So I guess that's the rationale. I feel like I can, make stuff, make things easier for people to use Elixir and to build their products.
Makes sense, and it's interesting that you mentioned impact, because I was going to ask, where do you see Elixir itself making the biggest impact in the coming years, in the next like 5 to 10 years, maybe? Maybe 10 is a lot because Elixir is a young language, but maybe the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I'm not sure, but what I would say is that Elixir already made quite a lot of impact in terms of live view. For example, that's something that I believe Phoenix team, the Elixir community, pioneered, and a solution like that has been adopted by kind of other ecosystems. So if nothing else, I think kind of introducing this new paradigm of building applications, more kind of server-driven applications, is already something that we can, I don't know, kind of acknowledge that that Elixir had to kind of made a dent. Yeah, for
For
sure.
sure. And for Elixir itself, what do you think the next 5 years are going to be? So not only impact. So I know you mentioned like live view solidifying, getting to 1.10. We have types coming in that just were released internally in the latest release of Elixir. So where do you see the language slash ecosystem going?
Yeah, so I'm not personally super involved, but I think the machine learning and AI space is something that the community is heavily invested in. So, the kind of it does seem like again, pretty biased, but Elixir does seem like a pretty nice kind of environment stack to build a lot of infrastructure, right? Communicating between servers, like doing distributed computing, maybe distributed training, even things like that. So I'm kind of hoping for that, but in terms of like I don't know, in terms of where. Uh, yeah, where this might go, I honestly don't know. Like I think with types, I think there's definitely a lot of focus on types, improving the development experience, also with language server protocol integrations and things like that. But honestly, what I think, so maybe this answers part of the question, but I feel like where Elixir can make an impact is allowing small teams or even single person teams to build products and projects that otherwise require many more than that. So with LiveView we can do kind of full stack web development with mostly using Elixir with Oban. So basically, yeah, Elixir and Postgres or things like that allow us to go very far, I believe. And even with a lot of these machine learning initiatives, we kind of still stay in the Elixir ecosystem. And again, like a very small team or even a single person team can do a lot. So I'm very excited for that. I believe that was mm, maybe it wasn't like written down anywhere, but I got a feeling like it was enabling people for quite some time, and I'm definitely seeing that going forward.
Okay. Yeah, that it's interesting. I think will be interesting to see in the next following years, because a bunch of the stuff you mentioned there, like machine learning, heavily dominated, I think, by Python. With a lot of libraries over there. We're starting to get some of the baseline stuff in Elixir with like NX, Axon, and all that. Same with LiveView. LiveView, I think, is great. Um, if you ask Elixir developers, but I guess if you ask front end developers, I don't know. Like a lot of them will have experience with like React,
React,
Vue,
obviously.
all that,
Hmm.
and then we have to learn this new thing. So I don't know. Where do you think Elixir can emerge from? Which Elixir still, I consider it a niche language. Do you think Elixir is going to be moving up the ranks and taking some of the market from like JavaScript and Python?
Um, I honestly I don't know. What I would say though is that I think you're making a very good point. That sure, like maybe LiveView is very good for for Elixir developers, but it may not necessarily be an easy sell for someone with existing skill set. So I think we can do two things. For, 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 uh, First of all, we can, and this is sort of call to action, right? But like creating resources, creating learning resources, how to kind of bridge that gap. But also, I think from tooling side, from the project side, that I think it was. I don't think it was intentional, but LiveView does work very well when you just use LiveView. But I think what we can do. So I'm not directly involved with the Phoenix team, but I think something that again, I'm not trying to add anything to their already quite full plate, but kind of trying to meet people where they are. I think would be very helpful to kind of yeah like yeah to bridge React, for example, with Phoenix or with Phoenix Live View. I think that is something um, that is uh, that is interesting and that is needed. And one example which I think I'm allowed to say, I think it was publicly announced that my colleague Jonathan just he was working on adding Python integration with Elixir. and Livebook. So we are going to be able to have Python code inside Livebook. So I believe things like that would definitely help growing the community. Sort of like maybe Python data science, but you want to
Yeah,
kind of
you can ditch your
integrate with
the
Elixir.
notebook.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. That's yeah, interesting points. Let's see how it evolves. We're just kind of brainstorming some ideas here. But moving on to your talk at Alchemy Conf, as you mentioned, you're gonna be speaking at Alchemy Conf in Braga in a not so long. Your talk is called Library Client Server Symmetry. Uh, can you share a little bit of what it is about without sharing maybe too much and spoiling it for people?
Sure. So the idea behind the talk was an observation that we have. So it is, yeah. I will try not to spoil too much, but it was an observation that for, let's say, common things like data formats, like JSON or CSV or HTML or whatever, we tend to have libraries that allow you to encode something to that format and then decode from that format to let's say Elixir terms. And I think it is quite natural that when we write those libraries, even though, let's say, on my particular project, I only, let's say, need to encode into, uh, let's say, to CSV, right? In my project, I only ever export to CSV. I think it is quite natural to go a little bit a step further and implement also the decoding part to have that complete package that allows you to work with both ends of let's say the format. Even though we don't quite maybe need it in our project, I think it's quite natural to have that more complete package. And so that was kind of the idea behind that symmetry, that the library is symmetrical. It allows you to encode and decode. And I would say this is pretty, I can see that very often in libraries like that, like encoding into simpler formats and things. I don't quite see that in maybe maybe something more complicated than formats, let's say network protocols. They are, I think, a little bit like formats, but like a little bit more than that. It's also like the patterns of communication. And so, yeah, they tend to be more complex. And so I think that is a reason that maybe developers would not implement both ends of the protocol. And so I kind of want to, so yeah, that's kind of my idea for the talk. Like, um, why is it the case that we may not, let's say, for these more complicated problems, why don't we create these symmetrical libraries? If if we aren't, is there a way to have symmetry somewhere down the stack? Again, without revealing too much, that was my thought process here.
Okay. I guess for people that are interested in learning a little bit more about this and the end of this question, I guess they can attend your talk at Alchemy Conf. Um, to that point, I'm sure. So you go to a lot of conferences and you speak at a lot of conferences. So maybe is there some advice you can share with people that are attending Alchemy Conf and maybe they don't go to that many conferences, or maybe it's their first conference ever? What should they expect out of a conference, and how to take advantage of a conference?
Um, that's a good question. I'm not sure if um, I'm not sure if I have a great answer. What I would say is that if you are already planning to go to a conference, you are off to a great start. I think maybe I can speak to kind of what I kind of get out of conferences. I don't know if that's useful, but for me, I have made a lot of I've met a lot of people, and then kind of had even in some cases for over years, like conversations, and sometimes working on some open source projects, sometimes working on work projects. So kind of building or growing a network is very helpful. But yeah, but like attending a conference, what I would say is that what worked for me at least was to just say hi to people, introduce yourself, and kind of like ask what people are working on, share what you are working on, and for me it was always a nice kind of icebreaker, and it very often led to many interesting conversations, which I believe are the most, which I believe is kind of like what I personally get the most out of conferences, because you can always watch the videos later, usually, but you cannot really have that human connection otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the talks will be important to maybe learn some things, but also generate conversation and inspire people to have those conversations, maybe. But another question, a little bit more specific, I think, is people a lot of times, especially if they are new to an industry, to a community, they might get scared to approach the speaker sometimes, like you, especially in the venue where we'll be having the conference, which is a very beautiful venue, but you have a stage up there, so you'll see like the speakers are up there, I'm down here, so it's like there's these different levels. How do you what do you say to these people in order for them to talk to you? Do you not want them to talk to you? What do you think?
So what I tend to, if I have an opportunity, what I tend to say is, let's say after my talk, that I'm very happy to answer any questions throughout the conference, and I believe most, or if not all, people are like that. I think it's I think people go to these conferences to meet with people, so it would be so like it is kind of. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer this, but like for me specifically, I am very much looking forward to talking with people and meeting new people. So I'm yeah, like if you if you're watching this now and you're gonna be in Braga, please say hi, and I'm happy to talk about anything. And I believe I think you are right that there are the speakers and attendees, but in my experience, it's you know between the breaks and after the conference, it's kind of all the same crowd and people just talking about programming or other things.
Yeah,
So yeah, my advice would be to just say hi and sort of ask questions if you have any. Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I hope that happens. I hope that people do join and then talk to each other and have these meaningful discussions. That's one of the reasons we organize the conference for. That's what we want. Um, so, Wojtek, again, thanks so much for joining us today. See you in Braga in a couple of months, and very excited to meet you and hear you what you have to say over there.
Thank you so much for having me on, and yeah, looking forward to seeing you in Braga and see all of the people.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.